Hi, everyone. Welcome to Understanding Stories of the Bible, where we're unpacking the mysteries and the ideas and challenges that come from these ancient stories. And today we're going to be over in the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th chapter of Exodus as we look at Israel's exodus from Egypt and that journey that God took them on to the giving of the law of Mount Sinai. There are 4 episodes in this journey, and we'll study these 4 episodes right after we pray. God, thank you for this moment in time where we can come together, put our hearts in alignment with you and our minds in alignment that we might be able to hear what the Spirit says. And so, Lord, we surrender ourselves to be able to hear from heaven. Touch our minds, touch our hearts, help us to stay attuned and attentive to your voice through all of this. Help me, Lord, as I navigate this information in a way that makes it practical and understandable and usable in people's lives. We love you, Lord, and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so Israel is leaving Egypt, and I think the major thing that God is teaching them is how to take responsibility for your life. I think that's the major lesson that the slaves of Egypt had to learn in their exodus. Now, put all this together. If you're a slave and your father was a slave and your father's father was a slave, and you're going back 10 generations or more, that slavery is all that you've ever known. You've probably grown accustomed to it. Human beings have an incredible capacity to adapt to their present situation, and usually within a matter of days, human beings have the ability to kind of adapt to whatever stress or the environment in which they find themselves, especially when they know that there is no changing their environment. So, what happens to the mind of a slave? What happens to their worldview? Well, as a slave, things are dictated to you. You're really not. You're fully not responsible. That's kind of the first word, and I think the key word here, responsibility. You're not fully responsible for your life because life has been dictated to you. Okay, so when you get up in the morning is dictated to you. How much food you have in your house is not really contingent upon your IQ, your hard work, your help or compassion to people. It's really not contingent upon your conscientiousness. How much food you have in your house is contingent upon whatever the master of that situation decides to give you. And so Israel had lived that way, and what happens now is that they have to experience freedom, and that was a culture shock in many, many ways. And so they had to go from Pharaoh being their master to ultimately, in this theocracy that God was creating, they had to go from Pharaoh being their master to God being their master. And that was not an easy transition. Okay, so back to the mindset of a slave. When you get up in the morning is dictated to you. How much food you have in your house is dictated to you. What you do, as far as like your living, your job, or whatever, is dictated to you. So what's your purpose? Well, your purpose is just to do what you're told. Your life is completely structured inside of a box. Now, here's where it gets really complicated and tough for people, is that freedom breaks down the box. Freedom destroys those barriers. And so if you consider the balance between chaos and order, let's consider it like a river, for instance. A river, the water is chaos, but the banks of the river gives it order. And so that chaos is directed, and you have this balance in a river where there's life. There's the sustaining of not just life in the river, but people, human beings, will navigate towards rivers. They navigate in the rivers, but they are drawn to the rivers because there's life there. And so most major cities are established on rivers. And so there's life in a river. They look for the rivers. And what is a river? A river is this perfect illustration, I suppose perfect, of the balance of chaos and order, where chaos is not necessarily a negative thing in that connotation. Chaos is life. Chaos is potential. Now let's use the idea of life being chaos, and another illustration of the balance of order and chaos, not just a river, but let's take a grapevine, or for people that have gardens, a tomato plant, whichever. You have the chaos, which is life. You have the vine of the grapevine. It grows in all kinds of chaotic directions. Same thing with the tomato plant. It grows in all kinds of chaotic. You cannot predict nature. You cannot really control nature fully. Nature is always pressing. A friend of mine has a cabin out in the middle of the woods, and he says it's a constant battle with nature because nature constantly wants to take back what's theirs, what belongs to it. So he carved out a place in the woods and built a house and has to constantly fight nature because nature wants that land back. And so think about life being this sense of chaos where there's no real order or structure per se, even though there is, but just kind of in the way of thinking about it and conceptualizing this balance. You might think of the tomato plant or the grapevine just growing, and that's chaos, that's life, that's going in all directions. But what do you do with a vine? What do you do with the tomato or the grapevine? You create an arbor, a structure. And you'll even see this in nature where vines will grow up cliffs, and the stability and in fact the cold lifelessness of the structure gives life the ability to expand. And so you take the grapevine and you have arbors. You take the tomato plants and you put a stake in the ground, tie it and give it direction. And the vines grow up cliffs in nature, and those cliffs. And think about chaos as life, and it goes in all kinds of directions, but it has a tendency to be chaotic without some form of structure. And in the natural world, you'll see again the cliffs are these cold, hard, immovable, lifeless structures, but they are there to give life the ability to be uninhibited, but at the same time not destructive. But it actually gives it potential, gives it purpose, gives it an objective. Okay, so you understand that. So if there is, let's go back to the river analogy. If there's too much order, too much structure, well, you have a rut. There's no life. You choke out the river, and you just have a lifeless desert with all of these. If you think about the deserts of the American Southwest, you've got these incredible rock features, this again, immovable structures of order, and yet there's no life, like little life. There's no rivers, and so there would be no life. But on the other hand, what happens if you have a river but no banks? Well, you have a swamp. And even though there's people that enjoy the swamp, typically swamps are not the place you want to live in, right? There's a lot of mosquitoes, there's a lot of wild animals, there's a lot of danger there. So what do we want? Do we want a desert or a swamp? Well, neither. And if you could bring structure and marry it and team it equally with chaos and order, structure, life, chaos, and you bring the two together, then it creates something that's beautiful and life-sustaining. Well, think about this, that slavery in many ways is structure without life. And this was what the Jews experienced in Egypt. They experienced things were dictated to them. They had no real will of their own. They had no opportunities of their own. And everything was dictated to them. Well, then what's freedom? Well, freedom is like life. It's like chaos. It's like the river, the water, at least in the river. And it just means that you can go where you want, do what you want, but that is a scary proposition. And here's why. I'm going to give you one word that I think is the key word in all this conversation. It's the word responsibility. Because really, in Egypt, Israel had no responsibility, or at least little responsibility. They just had to do what they're told. And I've noticed that as I've worked with people, and what I've done over the course of my life has been varied, like working with people in some construction realms, and then working with people in more of a professional realm in the church and that type of thing in ministry circles. One thing I've noticed about people is that there's a type of person that only does what they're told. Their initiative only goes to the limits of their last command. And it's let's say in a construction situation, it's the person that you say, okay, go over there and build this wall. And maybe then I turn my back and I'm doing something else, or I'm going to go get material. I'm whatever, and I come back and there's three guys just sitting there smoking cigarettes. It's like, guys, what are you doing? Well, we built the wall. Well, what about the other three? Well, you didn't tell us to build the other three. You said to build this wall. Like to take the limit of their last command, and their initiative only goes to that border but doesn't press on. Why? Why? Because there's safety in that. And if I say, well, why didn't you take the initiative and build the other three walls? Well, their answer is commonly something like, well, we didn't want to do it wrong. And it's like, okay, so at that point, the mentality of a worker that way, that only does to the limit of their last command, their initiative takes them no further. What they're saying is there's absolute safety in the last command, but there is danger and there's insecurity if I go beyond the last command. And here's why there's danger and insecurity: because I have to take responsibility if something goes wrong. Like, then it's my fault. Well, I don't want to take responsibility for this, so what's my option? Well, my option is let's just sit down, smoke cigarettes until the boss gets back. Okay, and there's people that, like, that's their mode of operation. And it's beyond the limits of what they're told to do, that they have to take responsibility for their life, and that's a hard boundary to navigate. To have the kind of wherewithal, the courage that it takes to go beyond the limits of what we've been told, and to actually risk going out into the world of chaos. And so there's a structure within the word, or within the command, that they understood. And that structure was build the wall. And there's limits to that, okay? And they live within the limits of that. That's this slave mentality I've been talking about for weeks. And so people live within the structure of that command, and then they don't want to go any further, because to go beyond that border takes risk, it takes courage, and the word responsibility has to enter into the conversation here. It might be the central word of that conversation, because moving out into the world of chaos means I'm responsible. It's someone going into the wilderness. It's that pioneer going into new lands. And Israel, as slaves, lived within the box of slavery, doing what the taskmaster said to do. And they lived within that for so many generations that we might even say it like this: they lost the ability to navigate the world of personal responsibility. They lost the ability to navigate the world of responsibility. And I think that's probably what happens with institutionalized people. Let's say recidivism is an issue in the prison systems, probably all over the world, because human beings are basically the same. But here in the United States, where people who commit crimes, they spend a certain amount of time incarcerated, do not always, and we would say probably most of the time, do not get rehabilitated. They in many cases, they just learn how to be better criminals. Well, this may go back to character issues and perhaps, but there's also this sense in recidivism, this sense of the fear of freedom, because it brings personal responsibility. That is a very real thing. And so a lot of people recommitting crimes and being reincarcerated, often, I'm not saying all the time, and there's statistics to bear out the specifics of what I'm saying, but generally speaking, recidivism in many cases is the inability for people to move beyond the world of absolute structure into the world of freedom. Because again, freedom means responsibility. And you have to take responsibility for yourself. And that's why the workers would rather stop at the border of the last command and not build the three walls, lest they do something wrong and have to take responsibility for that. And responsibility is a tough thing. People run from responsibility. We love to talk about rights, but for every right that we cherish and for every right that we execute, there must be an equal execution of responsibility. And that's not often the case. Often the case is we talk about rights, but not responsibilities. However, responsibility is a necessary ingredient to freedom. In other words, freedom is married to responsibility. Where there is no responsibility, there's no freedom. And where there is freedom, there is responsibility. And when there's no freedom, there's no responsibility, however you want to phrase that. And so Israel, coming out of Egypt, had a really problem. And that very real problem was that they could not enjoy freedom because they were not used to taking responsibility for their lives. And so, again, let's go back to their kind of mode of operation for all their life for many generations, which is, tell me what to do and I'll do it. Give me the tools and I'll use them. Show me where the hole needs dug and I'll dig it. But if you don't tell me what to do and I have to go get my own tools and I have to figure out where to put that hole, I'm lost. Like, I'm lost. I don't, people that have been captivated by that type of control have a very difficult time in the challenge navigating all the space of freedom, because here's why. Freedom is a big space. And we need structure. Okay, let's not act like structure is a bad thing, because we need structure. Let's take, for instance, playing games, playing board games. All games, all sports, which are games, or board games, card games, whatever it is, all of them have two things in common. There's an objective. When you play a card game, when you play a board game, you play a stick and ball game, whatever it is, there's an objective. And then number two, there are rules. There's an objective and rules. And so the objective is where we want to get to win whatever we're playing. The rules is the pathway how to get there. So playing the game is actually navigating a free space within the context and confines of the rules of the game. And so, if the objective in basketball is to put the ball through the hoop, well, there's rules in order to do that. You just don't say, well, okay, that's my objective, so I'm going to take a gun on the court and just start shooting people until they get out of my way, and I'll just sit there and put the ball up in the hoop, or maybe I'll get on a man lift, or maybe even better than that, a tank. Now I'll get on the top of that tank and I can probably reach and then I'll play with more than one ball, so I don't have to keep retrieving the ball. So I'll drive my tank, just run over people and just keep on putting the ball in the basket because I've reached the objective. Well, that's not how the human mind works. The human mind works with objectives and rules. And it's the structure, it's the balance again of order and chaos. It is the structure that enhances life. Going back again to the grape arbor and the tomato plant, okay? And so every game has an objective and rules, and you play by the rules to reach the objective. That's the fun of it. So life is actually, we might say it this way, that life is enhanced within the boundaries of limitations. And there are limitations, and limitations are not bad. Limitations are what gives life the ability to be enhanced. Limitations, this sounds, it sounds absolutely opposite, like this is an enigma, but limitations actually produce creativity. Because it's within the confines of limitations, say of music, that you can be creative. Every creative art has a sense of limitation within it, and it's the rules. You play by the rules, the boundaries, the musical rules. There are certain limitations and boundaries to all these things, and that's what rules are. They're limitations. And so you impose certain limitations on the sport or on the board game or on the card game. And imposing those certain limitations with that objectives gives you the ability to enjoy the life, the freedom, and the pursuit of that goal, of that objective. It actually enhances life. So we see this in nature, we see it in the human mind. And let me give you a further illustration of how freedom without limitation, or freedom without boundaries, freedom without rules, freedom without structure, is actually incomprehensible. Like for instance, let's throw out a couple of things here. Think about this. I used to do this when I was a kid. I would sit and think about this. A weird kid, okay, but I would sit and think about this. When I say kid, I'm talking about 5 or 6 years old. Like, I don't know, 3 or 4 maybe, before I was in school. And I was told that the universe has no ends. Like, where's the end of the universe? That would be where's it end? And it's like, well, it doesn't have an end. What do you mean the universe doesn't have an end? Well, there's no end to the universe. It just goes on and on and on and on. I would sit. I mean, literally, it's felt like hours. Maybe it was minutes. And I would sit and think, trying to comprehend no boundaries to a universe And to this day, I cannot wrap my brain around boundlessness, limitlessness. There's no end to the universe. That's okay. That'll fry some circuits. How about this one? How about saying that God has no beginning and no end? There's no beginning to God, and there's no end to God. Okay. Our brains only conceive beginning and ends. Our brains have to conceptualize boundaries and limits in order to comprehend the space in the middle. Without boundaries and limits, it's incomprehensible. Okay, and I'll give you one more illustration. Then we're going to talk about the 4 events that God allowed Israel to experience to kind of help them navigate the free space, which is this horrible thing called responsibility. And it was tough. It was tough for them. So, one more kind of illustration. What if we did this? What if you came to my house one day and we're sitting at the kitchen table and we're kind of bored and trying to figure out, just finished dinner. We don't know what to do. And I look at you and I say something like this. I say, hey, let's play a game. And you're like, okay. And then I say to you, okay, you go first. And you're like, what game are we playing? It doesn't matter. Whatever game you want. And you're like, okay, well, what game do you want? And I said, well, we're just free to do what we want. So we're having a game and you go first. Go. And you're like, you don't know if you're playing charades. You don't know if we're going to get cards out and play euchre. You don't know if we're going to get a board game out and play Monopoly. You have no idea what game we're playing. And so the freedom of having no specificity in the objective and the rules, which all games have the objective and the rules, without those specific things given to you, the freedom to just imagine all games at once, and we're going to play a game and you just go first. Well, the freedom of that actually pauses you and puts you in a catatonic state. Like you don't know where to go. You're like, oh, I'm just so confused. Because freedom needs limitations in order to be comprehended. But there is a balance, because slavery is all limitation with no freedom. Anarchy is all freedom without any limitation. So here we're back to the river. It's the balance of limitation and freedom, or the balance of structure in life, or the balance of order and chaos, however you want to word it. It's the same thing. So God is trying to bring his people from this ultra hyper structured world with no responsibility of slavery. Because the slave mentality is this: well, you didn't give me any tools, I couldn't work. Well, you didn't tell me where you wanted the hole, so I couldn't dig it. Well, you told me where it was, but you never told me how deep or how wide, so what was I supposed to do? It's not my fault. Oh, well, I built the wall, but the other 3, you didn't tell me to build the other 3. Now, how can I build the other 3 if you didn't tell me to build the other 3? See, what a slave mentality does, it refuses all responsibility except the precise context of the orders that the person is given by their so-called superior. And once that kind of conceptualization of the world is formed, once that we might say worldview, or we might say the interpretation of reality, once that's formed and it is congealed in someone's heart and imagination, they have no imagination anymore. They have no freedom anymore. And when that happens, then that person has lost all, we might even say lost all humanity. Because God gave human beings dignity when he gave them, Adam and Eve specifically, gave them and us the right to choose. The free will of man is the key ingredient of freedom, that free will to make choice. However, with the choice comes an absolute Siamese twin, not a first cousin. It is an absolute Siamese twin, an absolute secondary part maybe the opposite side of the coin, which is responsibility. Freedom to make choices, turn it over, it says responsibility on the other side of that coin. And people in this hyper reality of slavery do not, well, they cannot take responsibility for their life because they have no choice. Like there's no choice. They don't. So you are resigned. You are resigned to just a place of like, well, I can't do it. Now, let's try to draw the analogy and connect the dots to today, because that's precisely where people get to in their mind. Like, well, you know what? I just can't do it because no one's given me the tools. Well, no one, no, it didn't say to build the other three walls. I mean, I did the one, but not the other three. Well, no one said how deep that hole had to be. No one even told me where the hole needed to be. No one said how wide that hole or how long that hole needed to be. Well, I just, you didn't give me enough water and I would have died of thirst had I. Well, you didn't give me enough food. I have to have strength. And, well, I didn't sleep good last night because you didn't give me a house. You see what happens in a slave mentality? A slave mentality loses the dignity and self-respect that responsibility brings. That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy. And then what happens is that people at some point in time even take refuge in that, because because being victimized in that way, being dehumanized in that way, actually becomes a comfort. I heard a lecture. I was actually early this morning was listening to a TED talk about a young lady that was talking about responsibility, and she had been sexually abused as a teenager, and she was telling that story. And she just talked about the liberation that responsibility, embracing responsibility for her life gave her. She said that being a victim and having that mentality limited her life in such a way and continued the victimization. Once you adopt a victim mentality as your identity, then that self-limiting identity keeps you in the victimized box, and there's no freedom in that. The first step of freedom outside that box. I'm going to say this one thing, then we'll look at these four events. But the first step outside of that box of containment, that prison of victimization, is taking responsibility. Saying, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for my life, even though. And here's the hard part: when a person's been victimized and they feel like a victim, taking responsibility for your life feels like you're taking responsibility for the act that was perpetrated against you. Like, if I take responsibility for my life, then why? Am I responsible for what they did? And the answer to that, of course, is no. Absolutely no. There is justice is simply the assigning. Let's say it that way. That justice is the assigning of guilt and innocence. And so justice is served by assigning guilt on their part and innocence on your part in the event that we're talking about. However, taking responsibility for your life, don't assume that means taking responsibility for that event. So applying this to our lives, we take responsibility for our life where we're at now. And this was a great talk, a TED talk on responsibility, when she talked about really taking back her life. The first step was taking responsibility for where I'm at now, because Dietrich Bonhoeffer said something, the great minister and theologian, when he was taken captive by the Nazis in Germany because of his outspokenness against them. And the story goes that they had taken things from him, and they said, we took your home and you wouldn't be quiet. We took your library, wouldn't be quiet. Took your ministry, wouldn't be quiet. Took your family, wouldn't be quiet. We even took your clothes. He was standing before them naked and absolutely destitute in life, nothing. And his response, in the story at least, was that, well, you can take my ministry, my library, my home, my family, my clothes, but you cannot steal from me my right to respond to you. That's taking responsibility. So you don't have to take responsibility for the event, but here's what you do have to take responsibility for. You have to take responsibility for how you respond to that event. So you may not be responsible. Your forefathers may not be responsible. In the case of Israel, they're not responsible for being slaves. Their fathers were not responsible for being slaves. It was imposed upon them. They don't take responsibility for slavery. However, God is teaching them how to take responsibility for their life today, how we are going to respond to being victimized and being oppressed. So I'm going to take responsibility for my life. And you cannot own your future until you take responsibility for your present. Let me say that again. You cannot own your future until you take responsibility for your present. And this is the lesson that Israel is learning through this journey. It's a short journey. 50 days is the idea. At least that's how Israel celebrated from Passover to Pentecost, was a 50-day period. And it was to commemorate the giving of the law, at least Pentecost was. And so from Passover until they came to Mount Sinai, where the law was given, was about a 50-day, almost 2 months journey. And it was in these 50 days that Israel learned 4 lessons in 4 episodes. And we'll just briefly talk about these episodes. I'm not going to get into them very deep for time's sake. But the first episode is right at the end of chapter 15. And in all these episodes, they complained against Moses. And there's a common thing. Let me say this, and then we hit these 4 episodes. There's a common thing that Israel did in all of these. Number one, they complained. Like they complaining is the justification for my bad attitude. Okay, complaining is a lot of things. My brother said one time, complaining is praise and worship to the devil. It's like complaining, and that's a good statement. It's harsh, but it's good. And that is that complaining is giving glory to the situation that the devil's using to try to destroy me. So complaining is like devil worship. It's like worshiping, praising the devil's work. So that's one way to look at it. Complaining is also kind of this counterfeit responsibility, because you're able to vocalize your displeasure, but you're not doing anything about it. You're really not changing anything by your complaining. And so complaining is kind of it's the refuge of the powerless person. Okay, that's another way of looking at it, where a powerless person that feels completely powerless in changing anything, at least they think they are powerless, even if they aren't. They think they're powerless. And so complaining becomes the refuge of the person that believes they can't change anything. The best they can do is just yap about it and complain about it. So in all 4 of these episodes, Israel complained. In all 4 of these episodes, they assigned their anger and guilt to Moses. That's the second thing that happens with people that are trying to break open the box of the slave mentality. They assigned guilt to Moses, and like they complained, and then they would get angry with Moses. It's like, well, what did Moses made you free? Yeah, that's right. If he would have just stayed out of Egypt and left us alone, things would have been better. So they assign guilt because here's the victim mentality. The victim mentality wants justice. And what is justice? I said this just a moment ago. Justice is the assigning of guilt and innocence. It's the assignment of guilt and innocence. And so we are the innocent one. Of course, we're the innocent one because we're the victim. So I'm innocent. Well, if I'm innocent, then somebody is guilty. And Moses was the easy target. Interesting how the assignment of guilt was given to the person that gave them the freedom. That's kind of always the case. It's like a person that suffers from a slave mentality will always blame the person that gave them freedom for their present condition. That's why they blamed Moses. Israel, coming out of Egypt, blamed Moses. Because justice, again, is the assignment of guilt and innocence. And of course, the victim is innocent, so who's guilty? And many times it's just kind of the closest person. Interesting that they wouldn't blame Pharaoh. That's always, it's kind of a mystery. There's probably psychological reasons for it, but they didn't blame Pharaoh. No, they blamed Moses. Well, why? Because Pharaoh's powerless now. He's on the other side of the Red Sea. And here I am. I don't have water. I don't have food. You brought me out here in the wilderness to kill me. Moses, you're guilty. So interesting. The person that was closest to them, Moses, that represented their freedom. And freedom, and by the way, let me make this statement I don't think I've made yet, is that freedom is the freedom to succeed or fail. Okay? Freedom is the ability to succeed and fail. But freedom is also taking responsibility for both. And that's a hard thing because, we're just human beings. And so we want to make excuses for ourselves. And so if we fail in the scope of freedom, maybe we failed. Well, then it's not my fault. It's their fault. It's the economy's fault. I'm not in the best position. Well, my mom and dad didn't raise. Well, if these people that I work for would, my clients, it's their fault. They really wouldn't support me, or whatever. The people that the customers that came in, they didn't spend enough. Whatever. I mean, we can always make excuses for ourselves, and so what we see secondly here is that in common in all four of these events is that they blamed Moses. It's like the one that the one that gave me this freedom. It is your fault. We're assigning guilt to you. And so there was complaining. There was the assigning of guilt to Moses. The third thing that happened in every one of these four cases is, I think in every one of them, now, maybe it's not specifically mentioned, but it's definitely inferred, is that they start recontextualizing their days as slaves as being the good old days. Now, the good old days phenomenon happens to all of us because our brains want to protect us from the pain of the past. So our brains have a tendency to file the painful files in a file drawer that we keep shut in our unconsciousness. And even though it still affects us, we just, we don't like to remember those things. And so the brain then only shows you the happy highlights of the good old days. And so you look back, and I always see it like mountains, and you see the peaks of the mountains, and it looks like those mountains are just almost right beside each other, but you really don't discern the valleys that lie in between those mountains. And so our memories have a tendency, that the good old days mentality, to look back, oh, it was so much better, it was so much easier, freedom is horrible, but man, at least back in Egypt, and this is what they were saying, at least back in Egypt they fed us. At least back in Egypt they gave us stuff. And that's what happens with the slave mentality, is they depend upon the state to supply their needs. The master is going to supply my needs. And so I may not like the master, but by golly, at least we had a house. You know what? At least in Egypt, we had pots of boiling meat, and we were able to eat stew. And at least back there, we weren't out in the wilderness where it's hot and sunny and cold at night. And, well, we weren't left starving to die. And so, wow, so the complaining comes first, then the assigning of guilt and innocence, and then the third thing that happens is that they have this wishing to go back, to like reverse the clock and go back into what I guess in their minds they're thinking was the good old days. So what were the four challenges that God let them live through to help change their mind? The first challenge was they came to a place called Morah, and the water was bitter. It was probably, what it means, bitter, brackish. It probably had some there was probably salt in the water, or it was definitely not good to drink. Now, they had just come through the Red Sea. There's a long song that Miriam sings, the sister of Moses, and everybody joins in, and they're all happy and pounding tambourines, and they're having a great time, great party. They're worshiping and thanking God, and everything's great, And this is kind of a thing that happens with people. Their joy is very fragile. When you have a slave mentality and you've had a hard life and a tough life, joy is very fragile, and psychologically, the stressors. And I read a book about this. It was really interesting, written by a doctor that did a lot of clinics in I think Los Angeles, and she was talking about, and they've done studies even prenatally, where the stress hormones, cortisol in particular, actually creates through the networks of the way your brain processes information, and even the chemical responses of your body that literally are triggered, and just as a common word, stressors, talk about the triggering of these stressor hormones in every situation that you get into, almost like an overreaction. You ever met people like that? It's like the least little thing, man, just, oh my God, the world's going to end. Just the least little thing Well, these people grew up in slavery. I mean, if all of this is true, and it seems like the scientific data just lines up, that even prenatally, and there was a time I remember reading about epigenetics, which the surface, and genetics, that would say that the stress that we live through can be so devastating to the human body. It literally rewires our DNA. Now, why would it do that? Well, I guess our ancestors that lived in the jungles and lived in constant danger, those stressors actually give people the ability to react to a dangerous environment. And so probably, the DNA would get rewired according to people's situations and settings, and then that would be passed down even to the next generation. And generationally, my experiences then are passed down to the children that I birth. And that's kind of an amazing thing. And it really then puts a whole new understanding of what the Bible talks about generational blessings and cursings. That's a subject for another day. So you have these intense stressors that are triggered over every little situation that people encounter. I have noticed that before I read the book. It's like I would have conversations with people, and I would just notice that like folks that really grew up in a very stressful environment in their childhood and into adulthood, that every little, it's almost like, here's how I described it. It's like they feel like that they're walking a tightrope, and every little breeze feels like a gust of wind that's going to destroy my life. Oh my God. What? Oh, this is so horrible. It's like people that maybe work for me, and I'd like, oh, I can't come to work today. I just can't. What's wrong? Well, yeah, I just found out my brother's, sister's, cousin's, first cousin's, aunt's, uncle's brother-in-law, stepsister's boyfriend just had an accident and broke his leg. It's like, wow. And so you're going to miss work for that? But in that person's mind, and I would just observe this, in that person's mind, it was like, oh my, this is the end of the world. And for years, I just didn't understand. It's like I kind of connected the dots. It's like, so, these people had a common, very stressful childhood. So I knew that something coming out of their childhood created this phenomenon of overreacting to a commonly stressful problem. I mean, it's like the rest of us go through stuff like that too. I mean, someone gets bad news, or you hear of a loved one's death, or you got bills to pay. It's like all of us have a certain amount of stress in our life that's pretty common, but most of us don't overreact and fall apart. But people who have been used to the types of life that produce those stress hormones, it's almost like in that moment, the chemical release in their body is so overwhelming, it almost just destroys sanity, at least their ability to look at a situation, size it up. And that's what really it boils down to in tough situations. You've got to size up the situation, like put things in perspective. And at that point, people cannot put things in perspective because they have tunnel vision, and all they see is this little micro problem. But if that's the only thing in your world, then suddenly this micro problem is your world. When in fact, if you would draw back and put it in perspective, well, it's not the end of the world, at least, But man, for people that's been in slavery and been oppressed, that's hard. It's tough. And so they come to this place where they have bitter water, and it's like, well, they start complaining. They assign guilt to Moses, and they wish they would have never left. I just wish we could roll. I want to just go back to the good old days. And what that is, I hate the good old day mentality, by the way. Listen, just so you'll know, all right, like in the church I pastor, I don't want to hear about the good old days. I don't even like to celebrate anniversaries. Okay, and we don't have homecoming. I am so absolutely obsessed with where we go from here. That's the only thing I can control. I don't care about the past. What happened back there is not the good old days. I live in the best day now, and my better days are ahead. I hate looking backward for the best days of my life. No, No, just let me live in my fantasy world, if you will. But I hate the good old days, because the good old days are always fractured with this. It's just an inconceivable fantasy realm that somehow enters our brain about how lovely and what. Quit it. Let's move forward, man. Our best days are now, and our best days are ahead of us. Doesn't matter what challenges that we encounter. Well, boy, that was not the case with Israel. So they're complaining, assigning guilt, looking about the good old days, and then Moses is told by God to cut a particular tree down and throw it in there, and the waters then become sweet. Okay, so here's the lesson. God lets this and then there's a lot of spiritual lessons there with Christ, and the tree and the cross and the bitter waters of life can be made sweet. Okay, that's a beautiful analogy to this story. But what about those people? Like, they weren't thinking about Jesus whenever Moses cut down the tree. Basically, I think what God was wanting to teach them is that in everything that we encounter, instead of complaining, assigning guilt, and thinking about the good old days, stop. And here's what God, I think the first lesson is. There's a creative solution at hand. Okay, so what would have been a better thing for Israel to do? Well, a better thing to do, they should have just stopped, looked at their situation, thought about it, sized it up, looked around at what they had available, like what was available in the surrounding area, and then and this was what Moses did. He took the tree, put it in the water, and somehow that tree made the water sweet. Well, what I think God is saying is, instead of freaking out whenever it's not going your way, stop and find the tree. There is a creative solution within the context of this problem. But you have to remain positive. You have to remain optimistic, to use overused phrases, I suppose. But you've got to break out of this slave mentality, take responsibility. Here I am. I've got bitter water and some trees and a whole bunch of desert. That's all I've got available. These are the realities of my life. Okay, now what are you going to do? See, that's responsibility. I'm going to do something. These are my resources. They're limited, but here's where I have faith. Listen to this statement. I believe within the resources available to me is the answer to every problem. Within the resources available to me is the answer to every problem. That's the first lesson that God wants them to learn. Number two, they come to this place where in the desert there is no bitter water, because that's the last lesson. And they reach a place where it's like, okay, we filled up our canteens and water jugs. Now they're dry. And then they're complaining because they don't have meat to eat. So they're complaining, assigning guilt to Moses, and talking about the good old days. Well, God then does something absolutely incredible. There is an outside reality from which present answers emerge. And this is what we would say the second lesson would be: creative solutions. Creative solutions. That means that it is a discovery, a creativity. Like in the previous lesson at Morah, they looked at their present circumstances and used what was presently available in their in their present resources to solve the problem. This problem came out of some outside realm, and it was first of all manna that just kind of was like it's described like the dew. You know how the dew settles on the grass, and then the manna, when the dew lifted, the manna was left. So it's like this crystallized kind of food source that they were able to make bread out of, and it was sweet and it was good. Wow, that's cool. Well, what about meat? Well, God caused every night like these flocks of quail to come into the camp. And so the manna is like outside of the whole realm of the physical universe, it seems, that it just comes out of nowhere. And these birds, the quail, well, that's a supernatural thing, because it's not like flocks of quail go anywhere. They're not migratory and go, migrating across the desert. Like, where did they come from? Well, this is God saying this to Israel. The second lesson is stop, quit complaining, quit assigning guilt, quit looking at the backwards of the good old days. Some problems will find a solution in some creative realm outside of the box that we presently live in. And I think that's good advice. Like, these are creative solutions that come outside of the realm of our present circumstances and present life. And in order for that to happen, there's a degree of faith in God, and there's a degree of vision you have to have. The Holy Spirit, it says, will inspire young men to see visions and old men to dream dreams. And a vision, a dream, is a reality outside of our present concept of reality and outside of the realm of our own understanding. But creativity is an amazing thing. Creativity is like a God thought. And I think the Lord is just saying that there are times whenever we're breaking out of the slave mentality, taking responsibility for the freedoms that we enjoy, that we're going to encounter tough times, times of lack. And in the times of lack, there is a creative solution that's going to come from a realm that you're not even aware of now. And creativity is a beautiful thing. And some problems are only solved by thinking outside the box in a way that is completely out of the normal way of processing information. That's creativity. Okay. So the third then challenge that they came to was, again, no water, and they're in a place where there was a rock, and so they're complaining again. Here we go, complaining to Moses, assigning him, "You're guilty. I want to go back. What did you do? Bring us out here to die." And God speaks to Moses again. God says, "Okay, here's what I want you to show them today. Here's our lesson today, a lesson of freedom. The third lesson of freedom is that you're going to take this rod that's kind of a source of miracle power in many cases from the beginning, even from the burning bush, when God showed him that rod that he leaned on was going to be powerful, was going to be very important in the days to come, and it has been." He said, "I want you to take that rod, and I want you to go to this rock, and I want you to strike that rock, and from the rock, water is going to gush forth." And it did. So Moses goes out, strikes the rock, and the water comes out, and people are happy because now they have water. So what is God trying to instruct Israel in that regard? Well, the first lesson was to look at present resources, and somewhere within our present resources is the solution for the problem. Secondly, the solution to some problems is found in a realm beyond this natural. And I think the third lesson here would be this, that within the context of our life, even in tough times, somewhere in there is a blessing that we have to ascertain, we have to learn from, we have to extract from the present situation that we're in. And so Moses strikes the rock, and where there was no sign of water, water gushes forth. Well, where did the water come from? Well, maybe it was just miraculous water. We could just say that. But maybe maybe it's this. Maybe somewhere there was a reservoir that God created in millennia previous, when God created the earth, and he put a little reservoir of water down up underneath that rock. Because before Adam and Eve were ever created, God knew that Israel was going to get to that place, and in that place they were going to need water. And so I think that third lesson that God is teaching them is that in the midst of every situation, God has put a resource in that situation to refresh us and help us and to teach us. It doesn't matter how dry, doesn't matter how tough. A rock is a very hard substance. So it's like, this is not a lush land of beauty. It's a harsh land. It's a desert land, a rock. And you can't eat a rock. It's inanimate. You can't drink it. But from striking that rock, there was a gushing forth. Now we know from the New Testament, again, this is a picture of Christ that was struck for us, and he provides refreshment. I mean, that's another beautiful echo we find from the New Testament, a type, and then the New Testament antitype of Christ. But again, those slaves weren't thinking about Jesus. They were thinking about themselves, and we're going to die of thirst. But within that problem, in every situation we get ourselves into, or every situation we encounter, even if it's not from our doing, that within every situation there is some blessing, some subterranean blessing that's just ready and waiting to gush forth in our life. And even when we feel struck, that there's something beautiful that can come out of that. And this is to me is one of the most important lessons in life. It goes back to Genesis 50:20, one of my favorite scriptures, where Joseph said to his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That in every form of evil, in every form of horrible situations that we find ourselves in, from a person's deliberate malevolence to just situations in life that we encounter along the way, that there is something good that God can bring out of it. Like there's a lesson that we can learn. There is some benefit. And if we stay positive and we look for that subterranean well source, there's something in this that's going to bless me. I don't like it. I don't want to, listen, I don't want to go through it again. God knows I don't want to go through it again. But I can tell you this, that when I think about and I talk about these tough times that I've been through, I can tell you I don't want to go through them again. And they were hell on earth. And it was very painful, but I can tell you, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me at that stage of my life. Because here's what it produced. There's like a wellspring, a stricken rock, and sometimes you feel like you've been struck, but there's something that comes up out of you. If we stop complaining, stop assigning guilt, and stop looking back. That's important. Okay, final lesson. We got the bitter water at Marah, we got the quail and the manna, we've got striking the rock, and then the final lesson before they come to Sinai is the battle with the Amalekites. Now the Amalekites were kind of a nomadic people that were in that part of the desert and felt a sense of ownership over that part of the desert. This was their land and Israel was trespassing, and so there was a war that took place. And interesting now that originally, when Israel left Egypt, God deliberately did not take them the short route that was taken from Egypt, and I showed it on a map, I think, last week, right up through the north, which would have been a very quick journey to the Promised Land. But there would have been, because that was a major trade route, there would have been garrisons stationed there from Egypt. The Egyptian soldiers would have probably had garrisons along that road. Plus, the Philistines guarded the northern part of that road. Anyone going south or coming north would have to pass through their land, and there would have been war. And God said, "You're not ready for that yet." But now they must be ready. And so they fight the Amalekites. And why are they ready to fight the Amalekites? Well, because we assume then the lessons were learned, the 3 lessons about look in your present situation to find the resources available. And within the scope of those resources, there's an answer to your problem. Number 2 is that there is a time for creative solutions. We think outside the box, and from the creative universe comes these crazy, wild ideas, but yet, yes, I mean, these are the things that God uses sometimes to bring outside solutions into our world, into our problems. The third is that in every situation, that deep underground is a subterranean answer, a refreshment that God has put there sovereignly from the beginning of the world. And then fourthly is the battle with the Amalekites. And what is central in this battle is that Moses stood on the hill over the forces of Israel, the military forces of Israel, and they're engaged in this battle. Moses is on a hill. And as long as he had his hands raised with his staff in his hand, Israel prevailed. But then his hands would get tired and he would lower them. And when he lowered his hands, Israel would start being defeated. The battle lines would press against them. He'd raise his hands, Israel would begin winning again. He'd lower his hands, and they would begin retreating again. So Aaron and Hur noticed this. These were his 2 assistants. And so, first of all, they set him down on a rock so he could get the weight off his legs. And then one stood on one side of his arm, one lifted the other arm, and the 3 of them were, as Moses sat on the rock, the 3 of them were responsible for keeping Moses' hands in the air, and then the battle prevailed, and Israel won that battle. What is this? Like, what is God saying through all of this? And it's probably multi-layered. I think one thing is that God is teaching Israel that there are 2 dimensions to your life, and one is the physical dimension. Because one might look at this situation and say, well, what does a guy holding his hands up on a hill that if you're in battle, it's not like you're looking up at the hill watching Moses. You're engaged in this conflict. So what does the guy on a hill raising his hands have to do with the physical battle? I think God is saying there's a dual dimension, and the Bible makes this clear. A biblical worldview acknowledges that there's the earthly dimension and the spiritual dimension, and they're layered in many ways, but they're also mixed and they're intermingled in other ways. And so God wanted Israel to know that what Moses was doing was a spiritual act with his hands raised to God, and that there is an earthly energy that is released, or heaven's energy is released to earth whenever we're aligned properly. And then the opposite is true whenever we let our hands down and then we get unaligned with heaven and we are defeated because there are two dimensions at work here, not just a single dimension, say a physical world with a battle going on, but it's not just a spiritual world where it is being impacted by a man with his hands lifted up, but there's both the spiritual and the physical bound together. I mean, really bound together, like maybe two sides of a single coin. And when we are aligned and we are properly aligned in heaven, there's an earthly blessing. Jesus taught us to pray, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So Moses represented with his staff the heavenly connection, and in alignment, in proper alignment, Israel would be victorious. Good things would happen to them. And I think that's kind of the major lesson that we're encountering here. It's also important that Aaron and Hur supported Moses, and so there's this sense that it's not just one single guy that's responsible, that there's a team of people. And so teamwork is another truth that comes out of this story. But yet I think the major lesson for Israel is that she must be aligned properly with God first, aligned with heaven, aligned with the Word of God. Remember when we talked about games, there's an objective and limitations, or objective and rules. And so there's an objective that God wants to give Israel, and there's limitations, rules that God's about to give Israel, which is called the law. And if they align themselves properly with heaven and heaven's law, if they align themselves properly with God and His way of life, then you're going to have victory. The Amalekite battle here is just a living example of what happens when Israel is going to be aligned with God and His Word and aligned with His law. You're going to be a great, prosperous nation. And if you're not, and you get tired and you drop your hands, and maybe dropping your hands symbolizes this giving up of surrender, like, oh, well, let's just go back to Egypt. And again, the three things: going to complain, assign guilt, talk about the good old days, look behind us. Well, if that's the case, then you're going to fail. The nations of the earth will defeat you, and you'll be a defeated people for the rest of your life. And we don't want that to happen. So those are the lessons of Israel, the lessons of responsibility. Hopefully it made sense to you and inspired you a little bit. We'll get to talking about next week Sinai as we continue talking about the stories of the Bible. Okay? So that's the end for today. Again, hope this is an encouragement to you and gives you some direction and challenges your mind to think about your situation, what you're in, and what God is going to teach you through all of this. Okay? So we'll do this next week. God bless you. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.